Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. A lot of times on this channel I spend time digging into more abstract theology, and today I really want to bring it to a very practical level. One of the questions that people sometimes ask me and that I ask myself often is, how should we as Christians interact with media? What should we be watching? What shouldn't we be watching? What should we be listening to? How should we discern what is edifying to listen to, what isn't? Is there room for Christians to listen to secular music or watch movies that are not explicitly Christian? These are things that we should be talking about and considering, because we live in a media-saturated culture, a culture that basically everywhere you look, media is being presented to you, messages are being pummeled into your brain, people are trying to market their ideas and convince you of their validity. And so we as Christians need to recognize that everywhere we look, we are being sold a specific message, and that if we're not careful and we inundate ourselves enough with a particular message, there is a good chance that we will be influenced and swayed in one direction or another. And you see this. I have lots of people that I grew up with, that I spent a lot of time with, that would have professed Christ in the same sort of orthodox way that I do today. And yet, slowly over time, I watched them move further and further away from the line of orthodoxy into full-blown apostasy and heresy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that with the rise of media, with the rise of technology, the messaging and the marketing that is taking place through the media has a tremendous influence on the human intellect and the human soul. And our ability to properly engage this media is going to be how we defend ourselves against the lies that is oftentimes manifest and present in the media that we consume. So, the question is, how should a Christian discern how to consume media? And in getting into the answer, I want to focus first on what it is that we as humans are made for. What is our chief end? Now, in the words of the Westminster Catechism, the idea of the chief end of man focuses on the glory of God and man's enjoyment of God. Now, put into a little bit of a Thomistic spin with the idea of participation in the beatific vision, I would say that the chief end of man is unto God's glory, mankind participating in the fullness of who he is, in order that we might participate in the chief joy that is offered to humanity. You see, to be truly happy, to have true joy, is to fully participate in the life of the triune God. Now, obviously, we want to maintain that this does not mean we become God in essence. This does not at all diminish the creator-creature distinction, but it does mean that there is a true participation happening, and that the chief end of man is to participate fully in this life that God has given us, so that we are removed from all that would distract from this chief end. And so with that as kind of the framework of this is where we as Christians are moving towards. We are moving into deeper participation in order that unto glorification we might participate fully in this reality. That offers us, I think, the lens through which we are to approach the issue of media. Because when we think about media, I think that we need to, with everything, not just media, but specifically in this context, we need to do away with the idea that there's anything such as neutrality. There's no such thing. Neutrality is one of the greatest lies that falls upon the minds and hearts of Christians to deceive them into thinking that there is good media, there's bad media, and then there's neutral media. Media that's not really, it's not glorifying God explicitly, but it's also not, anti-God. And we act as though there's this neutral ground in the middle, but there's not. There's no such thing as neutrality. You're either for God or you're against God. Scripture is clear. There's only those that are dead and those that are alive. There are only those who are for God and those who are against God. There's no such thing as those who are neither here nor there, right? You're not halfway dead and halfway alive. You're either dead or you're alive, period. End of story. And so when we have this framework of these two opposites, dead alive, good, evil, spirit, flesh. This can give us a good way to approach media. And what I say might seem radical, and I think it is radical, especially in today's culture. A lot of the things that we need to be doing as Christians and we need to be teaching and talking about and conversing about are actual radical concepts. And the first radical idea is that as Christians, we should be avoiding any and all media that is not explicitly for Christ. We should be avoiding all media that is not explicitly for Christ. We should have no part in the deeds of the wicked. And so a decision that I have made recently is that I am going to once again be getting off of social media, period. End of story. And one of the reasons that I have determined this is that social media is oftentimes used as a tool for evil, and it's run by people that have a mission that is evil. The funding of these companies is going to things like abortion, to the LGBTQ agenda, and to all sorts of other heinous things. Now, does this mean a Christian can't participate in this with a clean conscience? No. I do think that there are different people that have different dispositions and different tolerance levels for different things. And so this isn't a blanket statement saying if you're on Facebook, you're not walking with Christ fully. But we need to be asking ourselves on a personal level, what is this doing to our soul, right? And I think that if we go back to what I was saying about the beatific vision, this is the end we're moving towards. We need to question, what is it that this is doing, or what is this doing to contribute to that end? How is this helping me to pursue this end? And I do believe, and this is not a slight to anybody that remains on social media, but I do believe that the majority of people, if they were to ask themselves this question, they would say that things like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are not actually helping them move towards this end. And I would say that in that case, if that's the truth, if it's not helping you move towards that end, if it's not contributing to your sanctification, if it is not helping you to love and cherish your brothers, then at the end of the day, what is it doing? Well, it's not really here nor there. No. We've already done away with the idea that there's some sort of neutral ground, right? So meditate on that. How are these social media platforms helping you to move towards the chief end of man? And if they are not, why are you still there? Now, moving the attention away from social media to something like movies or music, I think the same principle applies. We need to do away with the idea of neutrality, and we need to examine very closely, how is this helping me move towards my chief end? And if the music that you're listening to is not, if the movies that you are choosing to watch are not, then I have to question whether or not those things belong in the diet of a Christian. But Jonah, it's so much fun just to sit down and watch The Office and laugh sometimes, is there really a harm in that? Yes, there is. There is a harm in that. There is a harm in watching things that are not helping you to move towards your chief end. Because if it's not helping you move that direction, it's hindering you. Because again, there's no neutrality. It's not like I can pause my pursuit of my chief end for this brief moment of neutrality. If it's not moving you that direction, it's moving you the opposite direction. And one could even argue that it's explicitly moving you in that direction, because if you think about a show like The Office, which I know many Christians talk about and watch, a show like The Office, there's sexual humor in there, there's swearing in there, there's promiscuity, all sorts of things. And so you look at something like that, and you have to ask the question, not only is this not helping me move towards my chief end, it's actually promoting ideologies and things that are damaging to that chief end, that are contrary to that chief end, that are moving the opposite direction and pointing the opposite direction. Same goes with music. If the music is not uplifting you and moving your eyes towards Christ, is it worth listening to? And I believe that so many of you watching right now are making plenty of excuses in your head as to why what I'm saying is not true. And I'm making those same excuses in my head because there's music I like, there's movies that I like, there are things that I like that I know are not moving me towards my chief end. And I have to ask myself, and I ask you to consider with me, if they're not helping us to move in that direction, if they're not actively contributing to our sanctification and towards our progress to the beatific vision, then they're hindering us. And if they're hindering us, then why are we still allowing them to have part in our lives? If the goal of the Christian life is holiness, the goal of the Christian life is to move towards greater holiness and conformity to the person of Jesus Christ, then we should be willing to dispense of anything and everything that doesn't help us to move towards that end. And this is going to make us look like prudes. It's going to make us look like goody two-shoes, radicals. But we weren't called to the life of picking up our cross and following Christ if it was easy. Or that's not what we're called to. We're not called to an easy life. We're not called to a convenient life. We're called to a life of trial. We're called to a life of suffering. We're called to a life of laying down our needs for the needs of others, laying down our desires, our passions, our temptations, our everything for the sake of following Christ. And so I'm going to ask you, if you're following Christ, what things in your life are hindering you from doing that to the best of your ability? What things of the flesh are hindering you from conforming and walking by the Spirit? And I challenge you, get rid of those things. One by one, get rid of those things so that you might live in purity, holiness, and conformity to that which you have been called to.